So I'm here with Dr. Michael Shea, longtime friend and colleague, and we're going to be talking about overstimulation syndrome. So, Michael, it's been way too long since we've seen each other. That's wonderful to see you.
Very long time. And I should say it's been a long time since we've drummed together. And this is
Indeed.
what I would say we're drumming together right now.
hmm Well, you've been looking at my new Substack newsletter, Overstimulation Syndrome. We began that conversation, gosh, almost 10 years ago, about this phenomenon. And I wanted to just begin by asking you, over this past decade, what kind of changes are you seeing in the population resulting from the ever increasing amount of stim in daily life?
Well, I think the main thing I've noticed in what I write about in my books is that we're in the age post anatomy and physiology. You know, you and I, as massage therapists and you operating a school, we taught and that was our life, anatomy and physiology. And what's happening now is the contemporary client, their anatomy and physiology, so to speak, is overflowing because their immune system is overflowing.
Mhm.
And consequently, the challenges that people are having is in their metabolism. So it's the age we live in of metabolic syndrome, metabolic deficiencies, metabolic ill health. My favorite, um, it's not my favorite thing to talk about, but my favorite statistic is that 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. That's staggering that we've got a population in the United States, 93% that are metabolically unhealthy at
Mhm.
the level of their cardiovascular system. And that's where my work goes right now.
Mhm.
So that's the main thing. Just the short answer to that is metabolism, metabolic syndrome. And I've been writing and talking about that now for probably over 15 years.
Yeah. So the statistics that I could find indicated a rate of metabolic disorder or metabolic syndrome around 35 to 40%. That seems lower than what you've been talking about for a while. How do you see that? How do you see that number from your perspective?
Well, basically, I mean, I follow the literature, and there is
hmm
a lot of literature. So, and I hate to get into the politics of it, but you're going to get into political pushback. You're going to get into corporate pushback.
hmm
The big food industry, USDA, the big organizations that regulate the food industry as well, big ag, they're all going to push back against these numbers
hmm
because of the money involved. And so I I don't want to oversimplify it and just say, oh, that's just a corporate pushback and it's not legitimate. But when you really look at the thousands of research reports, you have to drill down in what aspect are they really looking at. Maybe only 35% of the people have an LDL problem as opposed to an obesity problem and so forth. But the overall statistic, when you look specifically at the human heart, because that's the organizer basically and the carrier of metabolism and nutrient and so forth,
Okay.
is 93%. And I have to say that stat came out about 5 years ago. And the statistics I follow are based on Robert Lustig's work at
hmm
the University of California, San Francisco. He's like the world's leading authority on sugar and processed foods and so forth. So I follow his statistics and in his readings and writings that he's done.
Great. And you read the latest post that I put up about food, and his book Metabolical was one of the three that I excerpted in that
Right,
piece.
right. And I excerpted that book in my last two books as well. And
hmm
it's a very, very important thing to understand of how we're being basically poisoned, and how our food supply has been hyper engineered to keep us addicted, and with it, not only with the sugar, but with the processed carbs. And his story about Doritos, where they would actually put people in MRI machines, depending on the flavor profile of the MRI, to see and make sure it targeted the dopamine receptors. This is
Hmm.
staggering, Rick. This is a staggering indictment of how we're being poisoned by our culture and society.
Well, it used to be just focus groups, and now it's complete science fiction.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
So overall, you're seeing the metabolic side as where we're showing up the greatest amount of disruption.
It's the greatest. I mean, my client base, it's going to be, some level or type of metabolic disorder, but then the genetics have to come into play. And if your genetics are deciding, well, you're going to get Alzheimer's, you're going to get type 2 diabetes, you're going to get cardiovascular disease, you're going to get cancer. So the manifestations of metabolic disorders and metabolic syndrome are going to depend on your genetics in the whole epigenetic pattern
Mhm.
that that each of us is involved in.
Mhm. So segue from that into another aspect of functioning. You mentioned recently to me that the autonomic set point was a function of infant attachment. I was asking you about the window of tolerance for the amount of stimulation that somebody could handle before their system goes into disruption. Um, what would be some effective ways for people to rebalance their autonomic nervous system based on differences in their early developmental experience, where somebody may have had a secure attachment versus a insecure or disrupted attachment, or would the same practices apply for rebalancing no matter where an individual's early experiences were?
My take on that, Rick, is that we are in the age of trial and error, meaning that or if I sit here and say, you got to try this therapy or you got to try this diet, it may or may not work because, again, that we get into the epigenetic pattern and the individual nuances with a person's immune system
Hmm.
and how that functions. So it's trial and error. And I sit here and I tell people, and I'll sit here and say it right here. It's like it's trial and error. You got to start with something. You got to try it, but you and I, Rick, have been involved in the embodiment business. What is going to make us feel safe in terms of our own embodiment?
Hmm.
And how do we recognize sensations of lack of safety? And that can be thoughts, excessive mentation, that can be emotional reactivity, all of the type of things that are involved with being overstimulated or overfed junk food.
Hmm.
So these types of dynamics are difficult to say specifically. So what I do is I tend to talk about contemplative neuroscience,
Hmm.
and I talk about the literature that's emerging on this new field of contemplative neuroscience, and how do you find the way inward to your
Hmm.
own dilemma? Because our own dilemma, if I don't want to oversimplify it, but I'm going to oversimplify it, is really fear-based.
Hmm.
So when you're overstimulated, when you've got all these metabolic problems, you have a fear. Everybody knows there's something not right with their body. And they're afraid when they get the bad news, whether it's cancer or whatever it might be. And the first step is always the inward turn. And that's contemplative neuroscience or pratyahara yoga is how do you learn to turn inside and begin to navigate the territory? Let's say the territory involved my my upbringing or my attachment style. I was surprised that probably over 70% of attachment styles were not healthy.
Hmm.
So, we are the trauma species. So one way or another, we all got that level of trauma.
Hmm.
And our set point, as you mentioned, is going to be different. So we just want to raise the bar, but we have to turn inward. We have to change our lifestyle. You've got to change your diet.
Hmm.
That's the bottom line. And I'm not going to sit here and promote a particular diet. Although when we go to the Bio International Medicine Clinic, where we both teach, my wife and I both teach, the first thing they do is they put people on metabolic syndrome on a vegan diet, a hardcore vegan diet for like
Hmm.
3 weeks. But it's not a long-term strategy. You then need to play around with ketogenic factors in the ketogenic diet at some point, because it's the ketogenic diet that's going to repair the brain
Hmm.
metabolically. It's going to repair and raise the set point. But these are all, multimodal, multifactorial dynamics associated with lifestyle. But the turn inward is critically important. And then the balance outward. How am I balancing myself with what is called in Japan forest bathing? You
Hmm.
guys live in a rainforest out there and
Hmm.
close to nature.
Hmm.
So part of the healing process has to be a continued relationship with the world of nature, but also an organized way of looking inward and de-traumatizing and de-stressing the overstimulated states we get into thought wise and emotional wise. It's kind of
Hmm.
a long answer, but I don't know if that's helpful to your audience or to
No,
you.
it's extremely helpful. Um, so working off that, um, you talked about the importance of turning inward when we're overstimmed and out of balance. 60% of the population now is using either smart watches or connected apps on their smartphones to give them information about how they're doing. So
Yeah, it's
I feel fine, but my watch says I'm really in trouble. So do you see that, 10 years ago when we talked about this, I remember because that technology was just starting to come out and you thought it was probably better than not having it. But now that it's so ubiquitous and people are losing the ability to get that internal information about their in the moment state, um, are we in danger of losing essential organic functions by relying on these technological wizardry devices?
Oh, we've already lost it. Once you start relying on an external device, the reality is I've been asked to do a research talk at the University of Antwerp in October, and we pre-recorded it a couple of weeks ago because the
Hmm.
literature that I'm looking at, I'm really, and you and I have been in the embodiment business, and this is what we're talking about for a watch, and I have one, and I got it because I had AFib at the time,
Hmm.
and yes, it could tell me when I had AFib. It didn't tell me how to get out of it, and then I realized, wait a minute, I already know what AFib looks like. I don't have to look at my watch.
Hmm.
But the key here is what's called the loss of interoceptive awareness.
Hmm.
So the science on interoceptive awareness is really, really fabulous. So what is interoceptive awareness? It's the conscious awareness of visceral signaling.
Hmm.
So for example, conscious awareness of your heartbeat, we've known this for like 15 or 20 years. Conscious awareness of your heartbeat increases empathy. You're able to tune into yourself and you're able to tune into the feeling tone of other people, which
Hmm.
would again be really, really helpful from a social perspective.
Hmm.
But the main culprits in this dynamic of metabolic syndrome is the interoception of hunger and satiety
Hmm.
and the function of ghrelin, which is the hormone associated with hunger. So I wrote about this in my immune system book. Actually, Kathy wrote about it, my wife.
Hmm.
We have different styles of hunger. And so hangry being one of them,
Hmm.
getting irritated. But the function of ghrelin signaling hunger is exceedingly important because ghrelin then is connected to the entire endocrine system in
Hmm.
terms of its function. And likewise, the hormone leptin is the signaling system for when we're full. Well, guess what? If you're obese, you've lost that.
Hmm.
So you've lost interoceptive awareness. You've lost that ability to be embodied and to send the correct signaling to the brain, and particularly the insular cortex, that can then regulate the demands that you need for energy, for food, for behavior, or whatever. And that all gets skewed.
Hmm.
So once we're looping back into, diet, nutrition, and lifestyle, but this also includes the signaling system of urination and defecation. In Kathy's work, it's incredible the number of people that are constipated that ignore the signal. And there's some interesting research coming out on how school systems are are really effective in unconsciously blocking children's ability to use the bathroom and have a bowel movement
Hmm.
or to urinate correctly, which means they're going to get constipation and the resulting disorders associated with that, as well as blockage in urination. I can't tell you the number of people that we consult now that have bladder cancer, both men and women. I'm not saying that ignoring the urination reflex is a causative factor for cancer, for bladder cancer. But what I'm saying is the mix here, there's a relationship, and we
Right.
are ignoring our body signals. And this is the problem with overstimulation in general, is
Hmm.
it allows us to ignore our body.
Well, and with ultra processed foods, don't they also tend to block or shut down the signals of satiety?
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Once you start loading up with ultra processed food basically means that you're eating a lot of processed carbohydrates, and you're asking your metabolism to go through an extra two or three steps metabolically to break it down
Mhm.
into glucose. But then it's too much glucose, so then you get into glucose insufficiency, type 2 diabetes. Dementia is now called type 3 diabetes. There's a direct link to ultra processed food and too
Mhm.
much carbohydrate now in dementia disorders as well.
Mhm.
So it's just a huge challenge regarding that situation.
Mhm. And it all goes downhill from there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, and then what happens is you end up, with big pharma. You end up in a medical system. There's all these different. I don't want to sit here and take down the medical system as well, but there is a lot of confusion. There's a lot of pushback now on statins and so forth.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of medical orthodoxy that really needs to be challenged. And I, for one, I was morbidly obese, so I have the right to say this, but I really am against the drugs that are being used for obesity right now
Mhm.
because I did it through diet, through nutrition, through what's called intermittent fasting,
Mhm.
and I work with my weight that way. But that's not being encouraged now, and so consequently, you've got these medical interventions that are also creating a deeper sense of disembodiment and
Right.
early death. I'm sorry. Metabolic syndrome leads to a really nasty way of dying that's been well documented. And I've spent a fair amount of time in hospice. Was just in hospice 10 days ago with an
Mhm.
old friend who died 10 hours after I saw him.
Mhm.
Um, and he had dementia and he had a huge diet of ultra carbohydrate and ultra sugary foods. Again, I'm not laying the blame on that, but you've got these related factors. We have to look at them. So,
Yeah, it's certainly one of the top factors in overstimulation. Let's turn the discussion to how does overstimulation affect interpersonal neurobiology? You like these questions, yeah?
well, you, you know, when you look at the world we live in right now, and you look at the world of aggression, you look at the world of polarization, you look at the
Mhm.
world of fear mongering, and the world of cancel culture, and all of that.
You
It
think
it
there's a connection?
ah no, the social media is just junk food, for me. I don't do social media. I don't I'm looking at a TV right now, but we haven't turned it on in 3 years.
Mhm.
Um, But the overstimulation situation really interferes with our ability to be social. And, we see that being played out in culture because of the way people are attracted to social media. And they're basically the way they're attracted to being overstimulated. And which means neurologically, you have to then change your brain physiology, your body physiology to a domain of not safe.
Hmm.
And this is the work of Stephen Porges. This is the work of polyvagal theory and the Polyvagal Institute. I've known Stephen. I've treated Stephen. Actually, Carrie and I went to interview him one time when he was at the University of North Carolina.
Yes, you all had lunch with him one day
Yeah,
some years
yeah,
ago.
he's still active and still very, very much involved in the whole vagus nerve situation. In terms of the overstim decreases safety. So once you have a lack of safety, then social discourse in healthy, empathetic social discourse becomes very, very difficult.
Mhm.
So bottom line,
That's our dog barking, who may not feel safe at this moment. He thinks he heard something
well, wait a minute. He
coming up
may
the
he may
driveway.
be totally agreeing with what we're saying
That's
here.
right.
That's right. That's right. The humans are right.
So other than telling people, well, shut off your social media, how to help people get back to a feeling of safety inside?
Well, I think these habitual patterns that we've gotten into, the main thing we're not talking about is that the habitual patterns that people have gotten into, and long time habitual patterns, we pick up these habitual patterns. And so we also need to be able to, the first step is just to be able to recognize whatever situation we're in,
Hmm.
mentally, emotionally, and otherwise. And once you can recognize that, but what does that require? That requires some sense of skill, an internal skill at recognizing. So you have the whole industry of mindfulness and mindfulness meditation and John Kabat-Zinn work with the mindfulness-based stress reduction,
Hmm.
which is still really, really extremely valuable. But that first turn inward has to require a sense of mindfulness so that you can recognize, and then from recognition about the behavior necessary, you can have a choice and reorient. That's
Hmm.
step two. You reorient to a behavior that's more social or more conducive to your own health and well-being.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that general sense there. So the turn inward is just the development of mindfulness. And unfortunately, even the overstim industry has co-opted mindfulness because now you have what's called mindfulness-based mind fitness training,
Hmm.
and those it's for first responders and for military.
Hmm.
So how can we then use the overstimulation
Hmm.
and use it in a way that's healthy and to get our needs met and whatever
Hmm.
those needs might be from a military perspective or for a first responder's perspective,
Hmm. Hmm.
in terms of saving lives.
Yeah. So I see a lot of devices marketed these days for vagus nerve calming or autonomic resetting. Do you think they have any effectiveness? Are they worthwhile?
It's a great it's a great money making thing. I mean, I've been following the somebody, let me see, the first vagal stimulation device I saw, because I see the literature on it. So first of all, before I knock it, um, it has a value because the research was that when you stimulated the vagus nerve, they were finding positive results with multiple sclerosis, I believe, MS patients.
Hmm.
And now they find that with the vagal stimulation, that it creates an anti-inflammatory response.
Okay.
So once again, these devices are one, two, or three steps away from embodiment
Hmm.
because you have the whole industry of what are called vagal maneuvers. And that's meditation and yoga, massage, body work, all
Hmm.
these vagal maneuvers that lower stress and increase a sense of safety.
Hmm.
But if you need to use a device because you're that far removed, whether it's the ring on your finger, my niece has a ring that she and her husband have these rings, and they're constantly telling my ring told me this, my ring told me that, which you mentioned earlier in this
Hmm.
interview. But nonetheless, if that's what it takes, then use it to to take that first step to lowering the tone in your body and to becoming more embodied, to raising the set point for overstimulation. Because the vagus pathway is a fabulous, fabulous pathway
Hmm.
for raising that set point and lowering the tone in the autonomic nervous system. And so is a lot of the huge market of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. I do a
Hmm.
lot of consults on that now.
Hmm.
Ibogaine, psilocybin, ayahuasca, they're the big three. MDMA is the fourth one that's being used a lot in California and in other places. So I do a lot of consults on that. And that type of plant spirit medicine is also a very, very valid, and it's also very expensive
Hmm.
when it's done in a psychotherapeutic situation. But it's a very valid way of making a rapid change, decompressing the fear that the brain has around change process, so
Hmm.
that you can then accommodate what the body is requiring for homeostasis and make some decisions about behaviors that are more appropriate for your particular condition.
Hmm. Great. Well, I think that's a good place to end for this particular session. Just so wonderful to be with you, Michael, and to have another round of discussion about this. It won't be another 10 years till we sit down and do this, to be
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, that's great, Rick.